Hello and welcome to part 3 and the last of the videos of the series on building your first SYSVIEW batch reports and utilities job. Make sure to watch parts 1 and 2 of this video series. There are parts of this video where you might want to follow along in your 3270 session. You can pause the video at any point and resume it when you're ready. In this video, we will be covering the following items. We will continue with the topic of symbolic variables and show how to set default values. Then we will cover validation of symbolic variable values. Next, we have a couple of other definition parameters to cover. We will cover a few best practices for commenting your JCL by including auto-generated definition symbolic variables and by including a table of user-defined symbolic variables. Our last topic will cover user-defined line commands and how you can use them to execute a Brutus job. And finally, we will summarize what we learned on this video. Let's get started on our first topic of setting default values for symbolic variables. Before we discuss how to set a default value for a symbolic variable, let's discuss the use cases for doing so. Perhaps the variable represents some data that is not on any SYSVIEW display. For example, a parameter that controls a report duration. Or perhaps your utility or report program needs a specific load library. And if it's a shared definition, you don't want everyone else to have to fill that value in. Maybe it does represent data that can be found on a display, but you would like to have a default setting every time you come into SYSVIEW. Lastly, you want to override a default value that was set at the site level or shipped with the product at the system level. To define a default value for a symbolic variable, use the symbol statement shown at the bottom of this slide. The definition can go where the other definitions are defined, that is, in the SVXW BRUD ParmLib member. But the preferred location is to use the BRUD SYMB member. This member is auto-included. It also provides a spot where you can override variables that are not in any of your user definitions, but where they're defined at the site and system level. So you just want to define the override value for these symbols. The symbol statement takes the name of the symbolic variable, and the value parameter provides the default value. The replace option specifies whether or not to replace any stored values from your profile. To the right is an example of a shipped variable and its default value. This variable is used on the IPCS utilities to identify your IPCS dump directory. We ship the default value of your user ID followed by the IPCS node followed by the last node of DDIR. If your dump directory does not follow this pattern, you can place a symbol statement in your BRUD SYMB ParmLib member to override the shipped version. Let's talk about validation of symbolic variable values. Our last symbolic variable topic is validation. The Brutus define statement provides two parameters, date format and time format, that indicate the required date or time format of any variables that represent date and time. You can use the validation parameter on the variable statement to identify date and time variables that need validation. BruList will display not ready in yellow if any date or time variable has a value other than the required format. This can happen if the value gets filled in from a SYSVIEW display that uses a different format other than the one required by your report or utility program. Selecting or submitting the job will cause the value to be auto-corrected to the right format if possible. If you use the BruList detail display to show the list of variables, the variable status will show as invalid as well. and you can use the correct line command to attempt auto correction. We have a few more definition items to talk about. The Brutus define statement provides an optional parameter called PGM name. This identifies the name of the program that is executed in your template JCL. In our compress example, we are using IAB copy, so you can add PGM name IAB copy to the compress example. This value is displayed on the brew list command and is useful for sorting your definitions that are using the same program. The last definition item we will cover is for processing variable case. The keywords for the variable statement are uppercase or mixed case. The keyword specifies that if a value for the symbolic is manually updated, the value should be translated to uppercase, for example. When a value is dynamically updated from a command field, no data translation is performed. Next, let's talk about some best practices for commenting your JCL. The first best practice is to include auto-generated definition symbolic variables. Symbolic variables that represent the values from your Brutus definition are auto-generated along with the correlation ID, which we've already seen. These variables are defined when submitting a job or viewing the JCL. They begin with brew_def_ followed by the name of the variable or the definition name. It is a best practice to include these variables in comments in your job so you can understand where the JCL came from or what values were set at the time of its execution. You can build your own comment statements as shown here, or add an include control statement with the supplied BRU/BRUD JCL template. The image on the right is an example of how the comments will be generated when added to our example compress job. The second best practice for commenting your JCL with respect to symbolic variables is to create a table of user symbolic variables. By creating a table of user-defined symbolic variables used in your JCL as shown here for our compress template, you can easily find the names of the variables and their values in one spot. Often jobs have multiple variables and they are in many locations in the JCL or in the control input statements. By having a table that shows the variables in one spot at the top of your JCL, you can easily identify what variables were used and their values. Our final topic is on the subject of user-defined line commands. SYSVIEW provides many ways to customize the product for specific needs of the individual user, or perhaps for all or groups of users at the company site level. One such capability is user-defined line commands. SYSVIEW comes with many useful line commands to navigate from one command to another in context of the data on the row, or to take an action based on the data on a row. But perhaps, based on your workflow, you would like additional navigations or actions. You can always open a community idea, which is a good thing. And you can also define the line command yourself. Let's see how that's done in context of Brutus. In our use case, we want to be able to drive our compress job right from the dscat command without having to go to brew list first. To do this, you need to create member line commands, line-cmds, in your user parm lib and add the definition shown here. The definition indicates that the dscat command will have a new line command called compress. The minimum length that needs to be typed in is 4 characters or COMP. Give it a description and the option of ACT to indicate that it's an action and will be grouped with other actions. For the Brutus feature, to process variables, we need to add the option Brutus. Finally, the command we want to execute is brew_sub, which takes a name parameter which will identify our compress job. Just as we did for the Brutus job definitions, we must reload our line command definitions. To do this, use the list LCMD command with the reload option. If you scroll down or do a find for dscat, you will see your new compressed line command. Let's issue the dscat command. On a line containing a PDS that you want to test your new line command, issue the compressed line command. Unlike the brew line command, your job will be submitted directly from here. Congratulations, you've completed the final video in the Building Your First SYSVIEW Batch Reports and Utilities job series. Let's summarize what we've learned from this final lesson. We covered the final topics on symbolic variables. We learned how to set an initial value for a variable. We also learned how to enforce validation of date and time variables. Next, we covered a few more definition parameters. The PGM name parameter on a job definition provides a convenient way to organize jobs using the same program on BrewList. And the upper and mixed case parameters on a variable definition controls automatic casing where needed. We covered some best practices for commenting your JCL by adding comments to include auto-generated definition variables, as well as a table for user-defined symbolic variables, all to provide context when viewing the output of your job. And in our final topic on user-defined line commands, we learned one of the many ways to customize your SYSVIEW experience by defining your own line commands. And in the context of Brutus, how to define a line command to directly execute a Brutus job from a command display row. For more information on this topic, make sure you go to TechDocs or use the topics command. Thank you for watching. We hope you find the Brutus feature very beneficial to your SYSVIEW experience.